Hey there, nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and we are back in the episode of Cheap Shots, the series dedicated to showing you how to save money on the wargaming hobby. And on today's episode, we'll show you how to paint Amallyn Shadowguide both quickly and cheaply for your games of Warhammer Quest Blackstone Fortress. By following the tips, techniques, and materials that we suggest, you can paint your miniature to a beautiful tabletop standard for less than $28. And when compared with the materials that you'll need to purchase from both Army Painter and Citadel, we can help you save over $130. Now, if you'll notice, Amallyn Shadowguide looks a little bit different than she does from the traditional box art from Warhammer Quest Blackstone Fortress. And the reason why that is the case is because we're actually going to use her to be the leader of a void-scarred Corsairs gang that we're going to be using in our games of Necromunda. So we decided to paint her up to match up that gang specifically, so that's the colors we're going to use for this video. As you can see, she has like a turquoise and brown color scheme for the most part. So that being said, let's go show you guys how to quickly and more importantly cheaply paint up Amallyn Shadowguide for your games of Warhammer Quest Blackstone Fortress. Now, the first thing you'll need to do for this miniature course is to assemble, texture, as well as prime the miniature. So the assembly part is really simple. It is a push fit together miniature, so it goes together very, very quickly. But for the base, though, we will need to do a texturing on that one. My favorite method to use is both wood glue as well as sand for my backyard garden. All I do is I paint the miniature's base with the wood glue that I want to have texturing on, and I dust it from sand that I get from my backyard garden. And of course, once that wood glue dries, what I do then is I take another pot of wood glue and mix it with some water to a 50-50 mixture until it makes a nice slurry, and I paint that like a wash all over the texturing, so that way it dries into an airtight seal, so that way the texturing doesn't come flaking off the base. Now, the next thing we do, of course, is to spray paint the miniature with some Rust-Oleum flat white primer. You can get this at your local Walmart for about $3.99, and it's a beautiful flat white primer. And you just give it the once over real quick, so that way the acrylic paint can adhere to the miniature. And once you're done with that, the first thing we gotta do, of course, is to paint the flesh tones on this miniature. Now, luckily for us, there isn't actually much flesh exposed onto this miniature as well. In fact, the only thing that's actually exposed on this character is her eyes as well as her nose. She has like this little respirator that she's wearing from her mouth, and she's also wearing a biosuit over her entire body. So because of that, all we gotta do is just pick that out in 2 thin layers of peaches and cream, and then from there, of course, we're ready to move on. Now, what we're going to do, of course, is to dry brush the flesh tones that we just did earlier. We just use Folk Arts Pale Gray. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 75 cents. We just do a quick once over with the dry brushing on this one just to create the some illusion of depth. Now, what dry brushing does, it does create depth in your miniature, because what ends up happening is the lighter pigments actually adhere to the raised surface of the miniature while the darker color stays in the recesses. Now, there will be kind of like a chalky kind of pastel texturing down these miniatures when you get done dry brushing. If that does happen, do not stress out. And the reason why is because when we get the oil washing stage, that texturing is going to go away. So the first color we're going to use to paint up this character is Tuscan Teal by Apple Barrel Paint. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. And this is actually the main color that's going to cover most of the miniature. So we paint all the armor panels that this character is wearing in 2 thin coats of Tuscan Teal. So we do her chest, her arms, her legs, as well as the power pack that she has on her back as well. And the reason why we're using this teal color is because she's going to be used as a leader of a void-scarred Corsair gang that we're going to be using in our games of Necromunda. And if you guys ever seen those miniatures, we also did that teal kind of color for those guys as well for our channel, so that's the reason why we're painting her up in this color. The next thing we're going to work, of course, are the arm wraps as well as the leggings that she's also wearing as well. This character has kind of like these kind of leathery looking leggings as well as arm greaves that she's wearing in her armor. So we're just going to pick that out in 2 thin layers of pigment paint by Apple Barrel Paint. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. That's a beautiful dark black color that's also got a little bit of texturing to it, so when you do dry brushing, it does an amazing job of catching those pigments. And the next step, of course, is to do a dry brush. We're going to use Folk Arts Dutch Aqua. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. And we're going to dry brush this over the entirety of the miniature, both the teal as well as the pigment that we did earlier. That way we can bring a lot of the details that we couldn't see earlier, like the individual musculatures of the biosuit, as well as some of the leather, some of the folds and the leather goods that she's wearing as well. And once we get done with that dry brushing, the next thing we're going to work on is the hooded cloak that she's wearing over her body armor. We're going to use Burnt Umber to do that color. We're just going to use 2 thin coats of this material all over the hood as well as the cloak that she's wearing as well. In fact, if you look in the background, you can kind of see the void-scarred Corsairs that she'll be leading in our games of Necromunda as well. So just put 2 thin layers of that Burnt Umber color. It's a nice contrasting color that complements the teal very nicely as well as the black, and plus at the same time it also kind of matches the same color scheme of those same fighters behind her. From there, the next color we're going to use, of course, is Territorial Beige, and that is to do a quick dry brushing all over the cloak that she's actually wearing. So the hood that she's wearing, as well as the actual jacket itself. The hood actually has kind of like this kind of long, kind of stocking look on the very back of her neck. We're just going to do a quick dry brushing with that Territorial Beige, brings out those highlights that we couldn't see earlier, as well as a lot of those details. So next we're going to work out, of course, are the weapons that this character is carrying, as well as her leather goods. Now, I'm not sure exactly what this, my buddy, one of my friends actually told me that the Eldar use this thing called Wraith Bone is what they're called. Apparently it's like this magical bone that, that sounds horrifying to say it that way, but apparently it's like this magical organic bone-like stuff that Eldar use for all their weapons and equipment. So because I picked down 2 thin layers of taupe gray by Anita's acrylic, you can get this stuff at your local Walmart, your Hobby Lobby for about 65 cents, and I paint this all over the giant sniper rifle she's carrying, as well as these egg-looking kind of hand grenades that she also has on her belt as well. As for the leather goods that she has on her character, which is basically the belt that she's wearing, we picked that on 2 thin layers of Anita's acrylic moccasin brown. Once again, 65 cents at your local Hobby Lobby. And the reason why we're using this color because it contrasts nicely to the brown that we use for the burnt umber for her jacket, and at the same time it also complements the teal that she's also wearing as well. And one of the last details we're going to paint real quick before we move on to metallic elements are some of the ribbons that are hanging off this character as well. In fact, on the back of her power pack, she has several ribbons that are hanging off, both like this weird looking sensor thing that she's wearing, as well as her power pack as well. So to help create that color, we're going to pick those out 2 thin layers of Anita's acrylic true red. You can get this at your local Hobby Lobby for about 65 cents, and we just paint those ribbons in 2 thin layers of red. The red is a nice contrasting color to the teal as well as the brown that this character is wearing. It's also a very eye-catching detail, and once we're done with that, we can move on to the metallic elements. Alright, so there's basically not that many metallic elements on this character. There's pretty much only 2 colors we're going to be using, which is Gunmetal Gray by Folk Art that costs about 75 cents at your local Hobby Lobby or Walmart, wherever you want to get it at. And we're going to do things that are like little metallic elements that are on the sniper rifle that she's carrying. So there are some mechanical parts that are exposed, like parts of the scope and stuff, the power cable that goes from her rifle to her power pack, as well as the blade of the dagger that she's also carrying. And then at the same time, we're also using Deco Arts Emperor's Gold. That costs about 75 cents at your local Walmart. It's a beautiful vibrant gold color, and we're using this for some of the other elements. So she has like some charms and some necklaces hanging off of her neck, as well as her belt, some charms hanging off of the energy power tube from her sniper rifle to her power pack, as well as the hilt of the sword that she's carrying, as well as its grip. We're just going to put 2 thin layers of those metallic colors, and we're ready to move on to the final details. And the final details we're talking about are the jewelry and the gemstones that are both on her weapon as well as her armor, as well as the lens of the little sensor on her back. Now for those gemstones on the weapon as well as onto her jewelry, we're going to pick down 2 thin layers of green turquoise by Apple Paint. It costs 50 cents at your local Walmart. And as for the little lens on the sensor thing on her back, you can barely kind of see it because it's got kind of shadow, so I do apologize for that. But there's like a little lens on the sensor above her shoulder. We're going to pick down 2 thin layers of King's Gold by Apple Paint. It's a nice, beautiful, vibrant yellow color. We're just going to put 2 thin little dots on that to bring out that detail, and then we're ready to move on to the base. And because this miniature is going to be used for our games in Necromunda, we're going to use the typical urban decaying type of base that we create for those all the miniatures that we have in our Suez collection for Necromunda. What we're going to do is we're going to take out the pick texturing and 2 thin layers of pewter gray. You can get this stuff at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. We just put 2 thin layers of that directly onto the texturing, and then ready to move on to the base to the dry brush. And the color we're going to use for the dry brush, of course, is Pale Gray by Folk Art. Just do a quick dry brush directly onto the texture that we had before to make it look like it's concrete. And once we got that little detail completed, the next thing we do now is to work on our oil wash. So we are doing a quick paint method on this, which means that we use 1 single wash for the washing process on our miniatures. And for most people, when they do the quick paint method, they like to use Army Painter Strong Tone for their oil wash, which kind of makes sense because Army Painter Strong Tone is a beautiful product that does exactly as advertised. The only problem though is that Army Painter Strong Tone is quite expensive at $32.99 per can. A cheaper alternative would be to use Midwax Poly Shade in Mission Oak color. You can get this at your local Walmart for about $6, $6 or $7, and that is the material I like to use on my miniatures. So what I do is I apply it like a wash all over the entirety of the miniature, so that way it does a couple of things. The first thing the oil wash does, of course, is to darken down the vibrancy of the colors that we used before. As you can see, the miniature does not look as cartoony as it did before. In fact, the colors are really dark and it looks kind of grimy, like it's been through some really rough environments. The second thing that it also does as well is it smooths out the transitions between our dry brushes as well as our base coats. As you can see, that chalky pastel texture is now gone because those different layers have been smoothed out, those transitions. And the last last thing it does, of course, is it seeps directly into the recesses of the miniature as well, bringing out a lot of the details we couldn't see before. So like the individual gaps of the armor panels, for example, around the gemstones, the inner workings of the sniper rifle, the individual grains of sand on the base, and it does an amazing job of bringing out those details. Now we do have to let this stuff dry and cure for about 24 hours, and the reason why is because there's a polyurethane mixed with the stain. So my suggestion to you is to make this the very last step of your painting process whenever you actually do any painting. That way, by the time you come back to work on the project again, it should be about 24 hours later, and you can continue on with your work on it. Now that it's been 24 hours, we come back again to paint the rim of the bases, and I like to use Skyline by Folk Art. Costs about 75 cents at your local Walmart. I just put 2 thin layers along the rim of the base of the miniature because that is the color we use for all of our Necromunda miniatures. And once you've done that final detail, the next step is completely optional. And that next step, of course, is a matte varnish spray. I like to use a Krylon matte varnish spray that you can get with your local Walmart for about $5.99. And the reason why I do that is so that way I can mute down the high gloss finish of the polyurethane from the polyurethane that we used earlier. So I just kind of spray that real quick to kind of make that matte finish. But like I said before, if you like that high gloss finish, you can totally skip that step. And with that last step done, the miniature is now fully completed, and this is the end result that we have using our Cheapskate method. And once again, the grand total it would cost us to buy all the materials, assuming you're buying all the materials for the very first time, is a grand total of $27.32 in order to paint per miniature with these materials. Now, what we're going to talk about next are the materials that you buy from both Citadel as well as Army Painter if you wanted to achieve the exact same effects that we did, except using their products instead. So these are the materials you need to purchase from both Citadel as well as Army Painter if you wanted to paint your miniature using those materials. You'll need to buy Thunderhawk Blue, Averland Sunset, Morghast Brown, Baylor Brown, Slaanesh Gray, Eshin Gray, Flayed One Flesh, Mephiston Red, XV88, Rakarth Flesh, Rust Gray, and Ulthuan Gray, and each of those colors costs $4.55 per pot, which makes a little bit about 9 times as much as the cheap apple barrel stuff that we use in order to paint up our miniature. You also need to use colors Wildwood, Lead Belcher, Pterodon Turquoise, as well as Astrogranite for the texturing. You also need to buy Aethermatic Blue as well as Retributor Armor, and each of those paints costs $7.80, which is 10 times more than the equivalent that we're using for our Cheapskate method. You also need to buy Canada Corax White Spray for your base coating. That's going to cost you $17. Mutatorium Varnish to do the matte finish, which costs $19.50, as well as a can of Army Painter Strong Tone, which costs $32. So assuming that you're purchasing all these materials from Army Painter as well as Citadel for the very first time, you're talking about a grand total investment of $157.55. And when you subtract the Cheapskate total, which is $27.32, you end up saving $130.23 by using the cheaper alternatives. And that's pretty much how we go about saving you money on this one. So there you guys have it. This is how you guys can quickly and cheaply paint up Amallyn Shadowguide for your games of Warhammer Quest Blackstone Fortress. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is invaluable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blog.com for all the greatest hobby news related to this channel. That's good to do for this week, guys. I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace out and stay classy.